Yosef's about to reveal himself to his brothers, and he could not tolerate, would not tolerate that the Egyptians should be present when he reveals himself to his brothers. Why? Because it'll be obvious. The look on their face will bring about such a level of shame, and they'll understand that it's a big problem. See, he doesn't want to embarrass his brothers publicly. Therefore, he dismisses everyone from his presence. He says immediately everyone should leave his presence, except for the people who are there. So we pointed out yesterday, you say, Yosef was a tzaddik. But a human being's not an angel, it's not a malach. After all that Yosef had experienced, the trauma, how they emotionally, mentally scarred him, the way he's mistreated and what he suffered due to the being sold into slavery, how could he have this level of sensitivity, even though he may not do it intentional, but to be sensitive enough to take it into account, to dismiss everyone in his presence, understanding what the consequence of this would be. And this is really Ezul Chochem Aros HaNolad. The one who's wise sees ultimately what's coming, the ramifications. But after Yosef was traumatized to such a degree, how did he have that level of sensitivity? So we pointed out that because at the time that Menashe was born, God literally healed him, that there wasn't a trace of the past trauma or negativity towards his brothers whatsoever. So Yosef, in terms of his relation with his brothers, as if nothing ever happened in the past. As a result of that, he had that capacity and sensitivity that he understood the ramifications of his revealing himself in the presence of the others. Therefore, immediately he dismisses them. But again, it all goes into what he experienced earlier, that Hashem provided literally a miracle, that he should be the proper provider for his family to prepare for the exile, that ultimately his family is coming to Egypt and they're going to be there for a while. As we'll see, Yaakov, when he comes, he sets aside a separate location because he understands his father would not be in any way associated with what the Egyptian culture was all about. He was literally sequestered in a corner, not to be exposed to any of the people or the culture or the behavior. Because we'll see later that even the flocks and the herds they grazed in the area where Yaakov was living. He didn't want his children to be exposed to anything but himself. He raised his voice with sobbing. The Egyptians heard and the household of Paro heard. That was the degree of the sobbing of Yosef. Yosef was a very controlled person. He was able to control every aspect of his being. It's interesting. We speak about a person as a holy person. He has a certain presence of holiness. The Gemara tells us about Mitzvah that Shufra de Yaakov, the beauty of Yaakov, was a reflection of the beauty of Adam Arishon. Meaning he had a radiance, that it was his radiance was a semblance of Adam's radiance. So that's easy to understand. We had said that Adam, originally he was the handiwork of God, and because he ate of the tree of knowledge, he actually allowed that evil to become intermingled in his being. That somehow extinguished that radiance that the angels initially had mistaken that it was the radiance of Hashem. So Yaakov had a semblance of that radiance. So the Orach Chaim HaKodesh and Parshas Azinu explains that the reason why Yaakov was able to father 12 children who are meant to be the Odom, Atem Kruyim Odom, and ultimately received the Torah Sinai, because after Adam ate of the tree of knowledge, he refers to the eights, the tree that produced the fruit. Initially, the fruit that would have been produced would have been pure fruit. But now that he had within him that the aspect of that evil of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, his offspring were intermingled with that evil. Even Avram Avinu was not purged of that evil. The fruit he produced was not pure fruit. What's the proof of pudding? The proof is he had Yishmael. Yitzchak's tree was not purged of that evil. Proof of the pudding, he had Yosef. Yaakov, that all his 12 sons were tzaddikim, that was an indication that he was a pure tree. In his essence, there was no evil. And therefore, he was able to produce that pure fruit, which are the Shiftei Koh, the tribes of God. This is the Orach Chaim HaKadosh based on the Zohar. So Avraham Yaakov was what? Was the eitz, which was Kula Tov, was all good. It's interesting. We find that at the time that God created the world, in the garden there were two trees. There was the Eitz Hadas and the Eitz HaChaim, and the tree of life. If you partook of the fruit of the tree of life, you would live forever. And after Adam had eaten of the tree of knowledge, God says, I must drive him out of the tree, the Garden of Eden. Because now if he partakes of the fruit of the tree of life, he'll live forever. And because he has this tainted status, that evil, it cannot be. As a result of that, he drove him from the Gan Eden, from the Garden of Eden, and he set at the entrance of the Garden of Eden two accosting angels, which would not allow him to return. But what is the Eitz HaChaim? We find at Sinai, after the Jews said Nasim and Nishma, this is before the Chet Egel, before we sinned with the golden calf, the Jews achieved a level of purification that they reverted back to pre-sin of Adam, and at that moment they would have lived forever. After they said Nasim Nishma. Accepting the Torah itself is Eitz Chaim Hi Lamachzikim Bo, right? Those words are Shlomo Melech. It's the tree of life, Eitz Chaim Hi Lamachzikim Bo. When they attach to that tree, which is the Torah, they ascended to a level of pre-sin of Adam. That's the Eitz HaChaim. And as a result of that, they would have lived forever. As the Gemara in Avodah Zarah cites a posuk, we became B'nei Kel Chai. We were literally like angels. We were not subject to death. Only as a result of the Eitz Hadah, of the Chet Egel, because we participated to that degree in the sin of the golden calf, as a result of that, we reverted back to post-sin. But who is Yaakov? Yaakov is Ishtam Yeshagolim. He's the patriarch who personifies Torah in its essence. Because he personified Torah, he was able to purge himself of all the impurity that does not allow the fruits to be born perfect. There's no impurity in himself. Of course, the impurity Eitz Hadas was still there. But in terms of that any of his children should be evil, such as Ishmael or such as Esav, it wasn't meant to be, because he was the Eitz HaChaim. And this is the meaning, Eitz Chaim Hi Lamachzikim Bo, for that reason. Yosef now reveals himself to his brothers. Vayishvu Mitzrayim v'yishmu Beis Paro. He cried, he sobbed. And as I said, Yaakov himself had a radiance which was a semblance of Adam. If Yosef looked exact like his father, he was Ben Zekunim. And we said the brothers initially didn't recognize their brother Yosef. So the obvious question is, if Yosef's features were identical to his father's, similar to Yitzchak and Avram initially, how did he not recognize him? So you say, well, because their father's older, he's younger. But still, this level of resemblance, how do you not? So in last week's reading, the Sefarno explains, a person go into a state of denial. If they would have acknowledged this is Yosef, and they see him as the viceroy, and they're bowing before him, what does that say? That says that all they had done in the past, that they had suspected he was out to destroy them, and therefore they're ready to murder him. And ultimately they sold him to slavery. And all the pain and suffering that he experienced was due to their own misreading of Yossi's favor, it was something which would be unconscionable for themselves. Therefore, they couldn't, under any circumstance, see themselves unless they were forced to accept it. Therefore, they said he looks the same. There's a resemblance. It's not quite him. But there's no question. You could say that regarding facial features. Yosef was Yosef HaTzadik. Just as a tzaddik, who's at special level of tzaddik, he has a presence. He radiates holiness, which somehow you can't conceal it. Yaakov himself radiated a holiness. When you saw him, you saw a holy man, regardless. And if anybody has an understanding of Kedusha, it's the sons of Yaakov. And they see this man who's supposedly a heathen, who's supposedly this heartless person. How does he have this radiance? He has a radiance. So evidently, see Yosef, he had the ability to suppress and to conceal that radiance. That was part of his ability, as he could actually suppress his feelings. As it says, it reached a point he couldn't contain himself any longer. And therefore, and when he let go, he sobbed, that the sobbing couldn't be kept quiet. The Egyptians, the house of Paro, understood it. That's what seemingly why they weren't able, even though the facial features were similar, but what about the Kedusha? That's what I was thinking. But I was thinking something else while I'm speaking. There's a word we read in Pirkei Avos. We speak about Talmidei Avram Avinu and Talmidei Bilam. The students of Avram and the students of Bilam. We speak about their characteristics. Two opposite ends of the opposite ends of the spectrum. Talmidei Bilam are pompous. They have insatiable need for material. Avram, the students of Avram, Shval Ruach, Nefesh Shefela, the other ones, Nefesh Rechova. As much as they have, never enough. So there's a question which is asked, what do we have to speak about the Talmidei of Avram? The students of Avram, Talmidim, Bilam. Let's talk about Avram and Bilam. What is the differentiating factors, characteristics between Avram and Bilam? What do we have to talk about the students? Let's go right to the source. So the answer which is given is, Bilam was evil. He's the one who actually was the architect of the bondage in Egypt. He's the one who suggested it. He came to curse the Jews, to destroy them. He could not tolerate Kedusha even to a greater degree than Bolok, as it's indicated there. But he was a prophet. And because he was a prophet, if you'd look at him, you could not tell the difference between Avram and him. He radiated holiness. All that holiness had no relevance to anything that had to do with really Kedusha. Because since he was a prophet, he had certain things, he was exposed to certain elements of holiness, therefore he radiated holiness. So if you'd look at him, you couldn't tell the difference between Avram. There were shades of difference, but basically they're within the same classification of person. You want to know the difference? Look what they produced. Avram produced his proteges, his Talmidim, had exemplary characteristics, one of a kind, at a perfect level. You take a look what he produced. What kind of fruit he produced? You have two trees. Until the trees produce their fruits, they look like two fruit trees. But one produces poison fruit, the other produces the most special quality fruit. So it could be Yosef may have radiated something, but radiance doesn't always have to emanate from a source of Kedusha. It can be attributed to something else. And because, again, they're in a state of denial that they can't believe that this is Yosef, he looks like his father, a semblance of their father. He has a Kedusha, which also maybe it can't be. So they attribute it to everything but Yosef. And only now, when Yosef reveals who he is, as we'll see in a moment, Yosef had to add certain things to identify himself. Otherwise, they still wouldn't believe him. We had said when Yosef was sold into slavery, they had made a cherem that no one is permitted to divulge this to anybody, to Yaakov Avinu. Yitzchak knew that his grandson was sold into slavery. Yitzchak cannot divulge this to Yaakov because there was the Cherem. But when Yosef said, and they knew this, and even God would not reveal because God was taken into the Cherem. Hashem would not reveal it to Yaakov. The only way it could be known to Yaakov, Yosef himself has to reveal it. Yosef says to his brothers, I am Yosef who you sold me to Egypt. Once he said that, they knew this has to be Yosef. Because that fact is impossible to know unless he was the person himself. That was the giveaway. Otherwise, with all the other, seemingly it is, the level of denial they were in, it was impossible. They would not accept it. Only when it was something which was irrefutably true, beyond doubt, to the nth degree, only then did they accept that this is Yosef, as we'll see. Vayome Yosef Elechov, Ani Yosef. I'm Yosef, but what's the first thing he asked? Hora Vichai. Yosef has to nip it in the bud. There's a question which the Brisker Rav asks over here. The brothers haven't yet been back to Canaan since they had come. The first thing he asked his brothers when they came, how was your elderly father? Is he still alive? And they said, yes. And now, with all this going on, accusing Binyamin of stealing his goblet, so on and so forth, and Yehuda goes and paints the most evil picture, cruelest picture about Yosef. He's a cruel man, he's heartless. How could he do this to this old man whose soul is bound up with this young boy, and so on and so forth? So they paint him as the cruel, beyond cruel. So he says, Ani Yosef, I mean, they haven't been back. How are they supposed to know? What has transpired since they arrived in Egypt? They haven't been back. So what is he saying? Ani Yosef, is my father still alive? He doesn't know any better. They don't know any more than he knows. That's the question the Brisker Rav asks. So Brisker Rav says a beautiful interpretation. He says, you just made a presentation which is outstanding. And you painted me as the most heartless, cruelest person that walks the face of the earth. And what I am is a charade. Ani Yosef. I'm Yosef. I'm the most beloved son of my father. When you sold me into slavery, did you take into consideration whether our father would survive the pain of losing me? Is my father, after all that you put him through, is he still alive? Here you paint me as a monster. And who are you people? Are you people any better? You're even worse. Not that he wants to know, is he alive? How is it possible, because of the love that Yaakov had for Yosef, how is it possible that his father could have survived all these years? As we said, factually, he was grieving, and it was such a state of depression or pain, he lost the ability to prophesy. So this was a rebuke. Hodavichoi is a rebuke. It's not a question that he wants a response. It's a rhetorical question. This is the Brisker Rav. Also, his brothers couldn't respond. When he hit them between the eyes with this Hodavichoi, at this moment, everything came back in one moment. Firstly, the misreading of him with the dreams. They had done something unconscionable to an innocent person. In addition, what they had done to their father. They had done to their father only due to their own shortcomings, because of their own egos, because they couldn't accept that the youngest brother should actually lord over them, and the dreams are delusions of grandeur rather than being prophecy. Therefore, the Yochel also, and Rashi says because of shame. They were so totally consumed with shame, they couldn't get a word out of their mouths. They couldn't respond. There's an expression, I was so ashamed, I felt like digging a hole and just going in there and covering it up. Totally consumed, obliterated. There's no word to explain what the shame did to them. They were overwhelmed in his presence. They were bewildered. Rashi says, me'abusha, because of shame. Some people, lavdil, are shameless. Shameless. They can do things unconscionable. I mean, you look what goes on in politics. While they're running for office, they talk about one another as if you can't imagine. And they use terminology, classifications, even falsehood, slander, everything. And once the election is over, these people, they're the best friends. They socialize together, they vacation together. It's like nothing happened in the past. You say, what kind of quality people are these people? One moment, they're really literally to destroy one another, and they say things which are unconscionable. And yet, later, it's as if they never said it. It's almost like they're shameless. The characteristic of a Jew is by shonim. Even an ordinary Jew. So if you, at this level, of the shiftei koch, and they realize now it's due to their own shortcoming, it's something they feel is unforgivable. They failed at a level that it's not imaginable, fathomable to what degree they failed. Therefore, they're totally bewildered. They're shaken up at a level that they can't function at this level. Yosef he says, come close to me, and they came close to him. And he says, now this is the clincher. He just introduced a piece of information which was impossible for him to know, regardless of what his powers may be, of divination, because there was a cherem, even God would not reveal this to any human being. So how does this man know that I am Yosef who you sold me to Egypt? Evidently, it's clear that he's the man. He is Yosef.
Rabbi, was Yosef considered part of the minyan for the cherem?
No.
I mean, he was there. He was in a pit. He wasn't at the table having a suda. Or was he considered?
Well, Yosef was understood. Wait. It was understood. Yosef would not reveal it. Yosef would not reveal it because he's in the position, because it's a prophecy. He has to let the prophecy unfold. So he's not real for sure. But how Yaakov may end up knowing it. No human being knew it other than the 10 and Yitzchak and Hashem. And
I'm saying that's maybe one of the reasons you have to ask the obvious question. Like Ernie said, for 20 years, how come Yosef never notified his father?
Because we mentioned because of the prophecy.
He was in the cherem also. If
he wasn't part of the cherem.
He wasn't? Okay.
The cherem was not to divulge it to anybody. He was not part of the cherem. So why didn't he? Because it was the prophecy. He was going to let the prophecy run till it fully fleshed out. Now, the question is, if he's saying that already, there's an obvious question. What did he say, Kshu no Eli? So he'd say, because he is whispering it quietly, he doesn't want anybody to hear. Because it'd be shameful to hear that brothers sold him to slavery. Rashi says, because he wanted to show them that he was circumcised. Kshu no Eli, take a look. Ra'ei osam sogam omar. The heralem shu mohu. He showed him he was circumcised. Well, why was that necessary? If we're saying the irrefutable proof was that he said, you sold me to Egypt, what do you have to go show him that he's circumcised? Right? What does circumcision represent? You may be Yosef, you understand? But you're the same monster. You're the same pompous, self-consumed person who suffers from megalomania, God forbid. By showing that he's circumcised, he says, this is what I'm all about. What does the circumcision represent? The circumcision that was a removal of the evil of Eitz Hadas. I emanate from the tree, which is the pure tree. No relevance to that. Because that's why a Jew circumcised, he's not an Orel. A non-Jew, even if he circumcised himself, he's still an Orel. He still has that impurity. He still has the covering of his heart on the heart. The equivalent of not being, it's purely cosmetic with a non-Jew. With a Jew, it's not cosmetic. So therefore, just saying to Yosef, okay, but what's the future relationship? By showing him surprise and focusing on that, he says, now you understand who I am. And everything you thought was a misreading.
Rabbi, can I make a comment?
Sure.
You've talked about the past when he named his first son Menashe, so that he should forget about Yaakov and his past. But maybe it really also goes on the fact that his family hated him. His brothers, what they did was unconscionable.
Correct.
And that he had to really block that out to survive. And now this whole charade that he's doing is to retrain himself to find a way to try to forgive them. And in fact, we know, as you mentioned, he never really fully mochels them.
He never said the word mechila. He never said the word mechila.
Right. He doesn't use the word mechila. But so in other words, as hard as he tries, he really still has such a
No, he had no
hole in his
negative
gut.
feeling. We said no, he had negative feeling he didn't have. Because if he had any negative feeling, it would have been impossible for him to function as the person he was meant to prepare for that exile. He had to be fully committed without any trace of that negativity towards his brothers. Otherwise, he couldn't have functioned as he was meant to function.